don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never tell me the odds.
The greatest idea in human history, the theory of evolution by natural selection.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As a date with destiny. In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
We're living in captivity, and it's time to break free.
Welcome to A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.
Welcome to part 2 of my incredible episode with Dr. Christine Gibson. In the first episode, which you'll want to go back and listen to as groundwork for what we're about to do, we covered a lot of really interesting topics around trauma, around anxiety, around the media's influence. And in part 2, we go even deeper into collective anxiety and what it is that's really causing this sort of existential angst that so many people are living with, and also some really good solutions for that. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as you enjoyed the last one. Okay, I have a question then, and it's maybe a little, I don't know, controversial is not really the right word, but it's so in the one sense, I said earlier, I feel like we, on a personal basis, we live at a time when, despite what we may feel around the world, women now get 11 years of education for every 12 that boys do. We nearly have parity, and in university, women are ahead of men. And crimes against children, you and I grew up in the 70s when we were allowed to walk ourselves home from school. I mean, that was some scary stuff back then, right? But now kids can't, and yet crimes against kids are half now what they were in the 70s. The media is telling us a different lie, but on an individual basis, we are living in the safest times ever, and yet we have more trauma, we have more anxiety, we have more of this stuff. So what I'm concerned about is that what our brains are good at is actual physical, something's happening right in front of me, trauma. The reason that our amygdala works that way is I walked around a corner, I saw some lions, I smelled them, they scared me, I had a response, I behaved in the right way, I survived the experience. The whole thing gets stored in my amygdala in case it happens again. And by the way, gets past 6 generations down in case it happens to them again. Everything's good. But now you and I grew up in Halifax. I remember in Halifax finding out that Halifax was number 6 or number 9 on the Soviet nuclear hit list. So it meant that where everybody else was going to get a 45-minute warning, we were not. We were just going to disappear in a blinding light. And I remember growing up feeling like that. And so that's a very different type of a fear than this present situation. What I'm concerned with now is we have all this media, social media, TikTok, CNN, Fox, CBC, all of it. And they earn money on fear because when there's only good news, we don't click and check the news every minute. When something horrible has happened, we keep clicking. What's the latest? Did they catch him yet? Was he the murderer? We keep going back. So they know that. So they're constantly bombarding us with this stuff. But most of it is not actually threatening us. Most of it is not. We can talk about, there's this asteroid that might one day hit Earth, and we've got global warming on the way. Which generation it lands in, we don't know. So there are threats, but they're not the ever-present threats that sapiens evolved with. And now my concern, and what I'm seeing is that we're failing to treat those things particularly well. We're going to pharmacological treatment a lot, and I'm sure there's times when it's needed, but it's almost like I feel sometimes like we're coddling society so much that there's almost a reward in being trapped in that place. So, I mean, when you're talking about hey, I can solve this in one session, that's a different thing. I totally get that. But there's another version of, well, now I'm going to be in this situation. I'm going to get benefits for the next 2, 3, 5, 6 years and so on. I'm being rewarded for my trauma. Do you see that at all? Or am I barking up the wrong tree?
Well, it's tricky because I do understand what you're saying. And when you look at statistics, there are so many improvements. Hannah Ritchie was kind of taking over the Stats Finder. She wrote this amazing book about why it's not the end of the world. That brought me a lot of peace because it wasn't the message that I was listening to in the deep adaptation environments. And yet we kind of peaked when it came to equity. So I've been practicing medicine for 25 years now. There was a time when I could say with a lot of surety that people could get their basic needs met here. Whereas right now in Calgary, which is kind of Western Canada, I would say that most of my patients are on the brink of being unhoused, on the brink of starvation. Some of them are down to 1 meal a day. So you and I were in the privileged position where we kind of went through peak equity, but the equity is decreasing. We already have climate refugees. A lot of the equatorial environments are non-hospitable to human life. And that's where the refugees are happening. So there is a scarcity that is happening on a global sense that only some people are experiencing. And you and I are not those people yet. So when we say we're safe right now, not all of us are safe. And I think there is a collective awareness of that. So I want to bring that equity piece into it because a lot of my career is predicated on that idea. The doctoral work that I did last year, I was studying transdisciplinary studies in Middlesex in London. Transdisciplinary is kind of like that adaptive cycle. It helps me understand that things do collapse and they do fall apart, and then we kind of regenerate and we are adaptive. And that's ecological. That's nature does it, and humans do it too. But I really do think we're in the collapse phase of something. And I think it's important to acknowledge that because a lot of people do feel that it's in the ether. And a lot of people are activated because that collapse can be very frightening. And especially when you're barely getting your basic needs met already, collapse can be, life-threatening. And a lot of the folks I work with are experiencing that right now in a way that I did not see even 10 years ago. So I'll say that. And then the second thing is, what is that secondary gain? So when you say like maybe we're benefiting by coddling people, in psychotherapy, we call that secondary gain. So maybe someone is trying to stay on disability. Maybe their brain is saying, no, 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 let me keep protecting you. Hey, your sister is still stuck in the refugee camp. And you're not safe until all of you are safe because you don't live in an individualistic society. You live in a community-based one. Those amygdala signals can be sending these reasons why it's not okay to try to widen the window of tolerance. And that can be true. So I think we kind of tipped really far into saying, let kids express all of their emotions and let them do it in a big way. Whereas what I think we should have said is like, yeah, emotions are signals. And we should have like really made sure that everybody was able to express themselves in a way that my parents certainly couldn't. They would get the strap or, tossed out of the house if they really expressed themselves. Whereas we kind of opened up that way to express, but we didn't teach people how to adjust that volume dial. So you can feel all your emotions. They're important, they're messages, they matter. And if you experience them in a really intense way, they will cause you additional suffering. So I describe this as like a volume dial. So if you're mad at like a 9, or if you're sad at like an 8, that's going to preclude you from reaching your own goals. Feel your feelings. They matter, but feel them at like a 3 or a 4. And you get to decide. I don't say like, oh, that's got to go down to a 0, because that's where I kind of.
It's like suppression. You still want the message. You're just saying, maybe I don't need it so loud.
And so when I talk about EFT tapping or brain spotting and many of the other modalities I've learned, and many of which are in the Modern Trauma Toolkit, I differ a little bit in that I don't think we should get down to a 0 out of 10, because then you are suppressing your own signals, whether it's the physical symptoms telling your brain what your body is up to, or just your own emotions, which are valid. And the last thing I want to do is to say that you shouldn't have them. That's like classic gaslighting, and you can gaslight yourself that way. But everyone needs to learn how to turn the volume dial down. And that's one of the beauties of EFT. There are so many different pathways towards that. So the reason I said the word toolkit in the title of the book is because everyone has different things that they will respond to personally. And so I just told a patient yesterday at the addiction clinic, I think EFT tapping works for about 70% of people. There will be some people that don't respond at all. When we talk about secondary gain, there can be other reasons to have that obstruction. Like they just find it awkward. Like they don't want to, we just have to personalize the response. Some people are like, oh yeah, no, that's never going to be for me. And then they might respond to tapping. So my goal is just to study lots and lots of different 1-minute therapies and get them out into the environment, teach them to teachers, teach them to doctors, teach them to parents, and say like, these are the skills that our kids are missing. Because you're right in that there is a lot of folks who are not just experiencing secondary gain, but that they were kind of socially conditioned. It's okay to have everything felt at a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
That hurts them too.
I think one of the, like, of course, the big buzzword these days is narcissism, right? Like it's suddenly the whole world is populated. I was in an event the other day and the speaker asked, it was mostly women in the audience. And the speaker asked, how many of you have gone through or are going through a acrimonious split up or divorce with a narcissist? And literally 80% of the women raised their hands. Like it was like, and then he said, and how many of you, if I asked your husbands, would say the same thing? And it was an interesting thing because this name suddenly has, become this big deal. And one of the things that I've come to realize, or at least I think about that, is that what we consider to be, sometimes narcissistic behavior. I mean, in the simplest sense, narcissism is, let's say, unconscious selfishness. And so yeah, this is a silly thing, but if you are on a plane and the cabin pressure goes down and you put your mask on first, you could argue that's pretty narcissistic. But we know you have to take care of yourself before you can help your kids. So there's a balance. And the problem is when it starts to become unhealthy, when you start putting yourself ahead. And what I would argue is that we're now in a situation where there are, say, social or governmental systems that reward that dysfunctional behavior, that allow that type of thing to carry on. So in other words, not only do I not need to resolve the trauma that's causing me to behave that way, but I am benefiting greatly from this. The family court system is such a good example. From my observation, the very last consideration that the family court system in Canada, Britain, or the United States has is what's best for the children. It really sometimes feels that way. Because what I'm seeing as I look at many of these cases is this person is being allowed to do something that is totally not right, but they're being supported in that. In other words, we're in a hunter-gatherer tribe. The society would come along and say, hey, that's not acceptable around here. You can't do that. If you carry on like that, you're going to get ostracized. Narcissism doesn't survive the village. But now it's like, well, if you pay your lawyer enough, you can go down that path and you guys can fight for the next 10 years. The system is allowing that behavior. If you reward a behavior, it continues. And I see that, I guess, again, it's like, it seems like society is sometimes rewarding us for staying trapped. And so I love the idea that you're talking about of saying, hey, wait a second now, if I can recognize my symptoms, if I can recognize what I'm going through, here's something I can try to regulate immediately now. Because it strikes me that most people are just going from one amygdala decision to the next, and that the systems around us aren't preventing that. So let me ask you in a more practical way. Let's say let's use a family court thing. You've got, a husband, an ex-husband, or soon to be ex-husband and wife, and they've come to the place where they've decided it's all over. And what's happening, of course, is they're both feeling like their survival's at threat. They're both having probably some kind of amygdala response to this. What do they both individually do at this point to potentially have a functional divorce, to have a functional conversation? What are some of the tools? They come to you and go, Christy, I'm about to make that phone call and I probably shouldn't. What should I do instead?
But it's interesting because I get thrown in the position of like asking about relational issues, and I'm totally not trained as a relationship therapist. So I'll kind of answer it more from the perspective of the individual. And before I do, I just want to take a kind of corollary, like narcissism is linked to a psychiatric term called narcissistic personality disorder. And I think we kind of get
And
caught
now
up
it's a
in
TikTok
like
term.
narcissistic traits, like when somebody is really, really selfish and or dominating to the point of oppressing others. And we're kind of like assigning a pathological disorder disease. Number one, I'm really curious if this big psychiatric textbook put complex trauma in there, how much of what we now call personality disorders would actually fit under that category.
Yeah.
So I wonder how narcissism is adaptive. I wonder how a histrionic, so the person who's got secondary gains and they keep having those secondary gains, we would call that histrionic personality disorder, somebody who's benefiting from the sick role.
Yeah.
Well, how is that adaptive? One of the really amazing therapies that I studied was called NARM, or the neuroaffective relational model. And it's always asking, instead of what's wrong with this person, why does it make sense? How is it helping them? How is it
Yeah.
benefiting them? So you're describing that there is a certain archetype that is benefiting tremendously. And of course, we're seeing this in politics and leadership. There is a person who is kind of doubling down on that kind of power and privilege lever and saying, you can have this too. And for people that are afraid, they're like, oh, wow, I can join this powerful, like I can be the haves instead of the have-nots, sign me up. And so they're kind of pulling on the string of some fears and threats that people are feeling. Do I believe that there's probably some like inner, whether it's an epigenetic or a childhood wound that's kind of feeding their sense of privilege and entitlement? Yeah. So we could go really, really deep into why all that whole phenomenon's happening. When it comes to the scenario of that divorce that you're describing, one of the techniques I really like comes from Buddhism. So another thing that I did in the Modern Trauma Toolkit is I'm constantly aware of the lineage of the ideas that I'm talking about. Like if you look at so many of the therapies right now, there's a millennia old tradition behind them. Polyvagal theory maps perfectly to the Ayurvedic construct of the gunas. So they always talked about the different forms of mindset. The sattvic mind is calm, the rajasic mind is turbulent, the tamasic mind is still. And then in the 1980s, Stephen Porges came up with polyvagal theory, which was this neurobiological theory. All the psychotherapists are grabbing this. It's chapter 3 in the Modern Trauma Toolkit, and it's ancient. There's these things that we've always known about. And I think Buddhist principles are a lot of what we do in psychotherapy. So when we talk about mindfulness and bringing awareness to the presence of our body and grounding, that is centuries old condition. EFT tapping comes from acupuncture, which is traditional Chinese medicine, 10,000-year-old lineage. If somebody were to call me and say, how can I do this in a good way? I would probably lead them through one of the exercises in my toolkit, which is, how do you look at this from this first person, from the second person, and the observer? So one of the things that's really good as a skill to help with that interoceptive ability, or to be able to read your own messages, is to step outside the body and to really kind of take an observer stance to it. So if we were to be better at getting into that other person's shoes and trying to think, well, what's motivating them and what is it they really want? Could we find shared values that we could negotiate from? And then the observer stance, like if a third person was to look at all of this, sometimes that's the mediator, and what would be the objective truths that everybody could agree on? What would the observer say if they weren't stuck in my painful past experiences, having gone through everything that I went through with this ex-spouse?
Right.
The ability to pendulate into empathizing with the other person and trying to see things from their perspective is always good for dialogue. I'm getting better at that. It's certainly not my strong suit. And then the observer stance, to be able to pendulate or move back and forth between being in the body and observing the body. And that's observing my own emotional experiences. What's my nervous system doing? And then not being the one that's experiencing it, but being the observer self. So in Frank Corrigan is a psychiatrist in Scotland who talks a lot about this. He's the founder of deep brain reorienting. And he actually has this proto-self meditation where you actually become that intrinsic self. That's another way that psychedelics works, which is another thing that has ancient lineage, but it actually dissolves the default mode network, which is where we hold our sense of self. So dissolving that sense of self and not really being self is part of what can help us grow capacity. I think it's one of the ways that psychedelics can be really powerful. I know in my experience, helping to dissolve my sense of self allowed me to work in a more collective way. I think a lot of us with privilege, it's kind of contingent on us to start to pull the world in that direction, because collectively, those with the most power are acting out in more and more selfish ways because it's adaptive, because their brain is telling them it's going to help them survive, but it's not helping any of us.
I think that Bill W., one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, believed that LSD should have become a part of the protocol, which of course is a crazy idea when you consider what Alcoholics Anonymous was about. And, his thought was, I think it's in step 12, they talk about having had a spiritual awakening. We, take the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to find, and so on. And, his argument was that some people just don't have that spiritual awakening, and that psychedelics might, create that for them. And I think that is maybe a little bit like, if you, one way or the other, through deep breathing exercises or through intensive exercise or through psychedelics or through the right therapeutic environment, you manage to dissolve that sense of ego. What's interesting is that if you dissolve that sense of self, that if you're not there, you can't be hurt anymore. And then you can look at the memory and maybe look at it in a more dispassionate way. And what's so crazy about some of these trauma memories, and I think that it speaks to the mechanism when you talk about one of the reasons that I think this happens is our memories seem to be directly related to our emotional response. So if you have a soft emotional response, you might remember the event. But if you have a sharp emotional response, you're definitely going to remember. If you have a really powerful emotional response, you're going to write it to the amygdala and send it 7 generations along. The challenge, of course, is you have the event, and then you have the lessons of the event, and you have the emotional response of the event, right? And it's like, what's happening for a lot of people is that now a resonant event comes along and triggers the emotional response rather than the lessons. When I think about that, it's like, what I want to do is look at those events and say, I don't necessarily want to experience that emotion right now, but geez, how did I get out of it last time? Or how did my grandfather get out of it? And so on. It seems like I like what you said before about turning the volume down. It seems like if you can regulate and turn the volume of the emotion down, you should never parent while you're angry. If you can turn the anger down, you probably can be more functional as a parent or as a business owner or as a salesperson or whatever it is. So I think that idea of dissolving self is interesting.
Yeah, I want to put the corollary that I don't think everyone should, go out and get some over-the-counter mushrooms. Set and setting is really important. So
Yeah.
that sense of safety is a precursor to psychedelics working well.
Yeah.
So I've had lots of folks that have had terrible experiences when they dissolve that sense of self and it doesn't go
Yeah.
well for them.
In an unguided way and irresponsibly.
And then the only legal one in Canada right now, and through most of the states, is ketamine, which is actually a dissociative and not a psychedelic. When you said, you're dissolving that sense of self and completely distancing yourself from pain, ketamine's really good at that.
Yeah.
It's also a really different experience. And I, yeah, I just have different feelings about psychedelics and dissociatives. There's a chapter in the Modern Trauma Toolkit on chemicals. One of the things you mentioned was illegal chemicals. I'm like, yeah, well, physicians were prescribing cocaine and heroin like 50 years ago. So
So it's
like
Coca-Cola.
our sense of what's illegal and legal is constantly like a societal construct, right? That's how they got the Hitler Youth to do what they did, is they put them all on coke. Like,
Amphetamines. Yeah, it's bad.
so there was like the times of like the way that we have been interacting with pain. Right now, a lot of people are using social media for pain, or porn, or gaming, or like these are the ways that they dissociate and disconnect. But
Right.
humans have always found pathways towards that. So if you instead had a way to turn the volume dial down on those big emotions, you wouldn't need to be dissociating so much.
Yeah.
So I just think these are human skills that we have, you know, done really well learning over the years, and we're kind of unlearning it societally, and not everywhere, as you mentioned. Like I've also done a lot of work in Africa. I was running a nonprofit Global Family Med Foundation for 14 years now. So I've worked in Uganda, Rwanda, a little bit, Tanzania, Ethiopia, a little bit in Kenya. So kind of more Eastern Africa, but it's really interesting about what I see as the window of tolerance of my colleagues there. There is a real difference. I've worked in Nepal, I've worked in Myanmar. I would say Myanmar is, again, a really different story, because I was working there just before the NLD got in and Aung San Suu Kyi was there briefly, and then the army took it over again. There is a really heightened emotional response in the populace because there is a very legitimate sense of not being safe. I remember having conversations with the physicians there, really good people that were demonizing the Rohingya. And then I have the experience of working as a refugee doctor here with the Rohingya and knowing everything that they've been through. Their government told them that the Rohingya were unsafe and that they were the threat, so that they would kind of distract themselves from the fact that it was like these ongoing military coups. The people had been sold the idea that the Rohingya were their threat to their existence. And they firmly believed it, these really
Mm.
good people. And I think what ends up happening is
If you believe it and it's real for you, it's real.
exactly. Like all of these people right now who are saying immigration is the problem. This is happening in many different countries. There's these protests against immigration, but they're not recognizing that the billionaires in the meantime are stealing all your money. Like in Canada, there's like Loblaws and TELUS. TELUS has taken over the health system and the EMRs, and we're not really noticing that these massive corporations and these mega billionaires are making off with everything because they told us that immigrants were the problem. There is more than enough for everybody if that like inequity wasn't rampantly, worsening. So we get sold a story. And I think that the opposite of trauma isn't feeling safe all the time. It isn't being in your window of tolerance all the time. It's the opposite of being stuck down that pathway towards fight and flight or freeze collapse is mental flexibility and having choice. And one of the things that is such a through line in your story, Eric, is you always had choices. And a lot of people don't believe that they do. And so the goal of the Modern Trauma Toolkit and the work that I do is to remind them you have choice, you always have.
Mm.
Nervous system response, whether it's your behavior, whether it's your thoughts, you have more choices than you believe. And here's how to get there.
I think a lot about this, and we're certainly coming to time. I think a lot about this that you have, two people, like you mentioned before, they could experience the same traumatic event, but they definitely can process it very differently. And years ago, I was given a medal by the Canadian Senate. So I had to go to Ottawa and have this, I'd wear a suit and do the whole thing. The woman who nominated me for it, Mobina Jaffer, she's a senator appointed by Chrétien years ago. She's retired now, just over 75. But as I got to know her, as a little girl, her father disappeared. She was growing up, her dad disappeared, and suddenly they were refugees and they were fleeing from the country. If I remember the story correctly, she's on a bus and men are being killed all over the place. And she suddenly a hand reaches out from the back of the bus where all the loose bags and stuff are and grabs her on the shoulder. And she turns around and it's her father. He's managed to get into the bus and then they manage to get out the country. But they get to Canada with nothing. She becomes a very, very successful lawyer and does incredible great work and that gets nominated to the Senate and then uses her position in the Senate to free children from sex slavery all over the world. I mean, she has literally gone from being somebody with no choices to somebody who made really, really excellent choices. So I think I love the way you put that. And I think helping people understand they have those choices is supremely powerful. Tell us, Christy, I mean, you mentioned the book. Where can they find out more about you? How do people reach you?
So I'll just first say that I don't take patients because I'll always get questions
course.
after the podcast of like, how can I see you? And you can't. I'm working in the public system at the refugee clinic and the addiction clinic, and that's my practice. So I do lots of speaking and, engagements through workshops. I teach organizational workplace psychological safety as well. So I'll do a trauma-focused workshop for a workplace. I mean, as discrepant as dentistry or oil and gas, there's so many different environments where we're having an impact from trauma and emotional regulation, and more people are waking up to that. So that's my company, Safer Spaces Training. The book, Modern Trauma Toolkit, moderntrauma.com. It's in your indie bookstores, it's in the major ones, it's on Amazon, it's everywhere. If you're wanting to follow me and the work that I'm doing, I'm actually launching a complex trauma scale within the next year. We're just doing some pilot research on it right now to validate it. Complex trauma is kind of my wheelhouse, and that's not in the book of psychiatry. So I think it's going to be a bit of a game changer in the psychology world. So anyone who wants to follow that kind of work, whether it's research protocols or assessment scales, christinegibson.net is my professional site. And I'm on all socials right now. I've been really focused on TikTok, but I think I'm going to start focusing on YouTube over the next year. So just Christine Gibson MD, but you can find me through the website.
Sounds good. We'll share all the links in the notes. Christine, it's been a treat. I consider it a great privilege of my life that I get to talk to many very interesting people doing phenomenal work. And only sweeter that we're fellow Canadians. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, and it was a great conversation, Eric. I really appreciated it too.
Excellent. Hey, everybody, another outstanding episode of A Wilder Life. And if you take one thing away from this, it is to remember that you have a choice. And I often talk about your ability to choose your response. And I think that what you're hearing here, and you can certainly get from Christine's book, is that there are mechanisms that you can use to turn down the volume. So please go ahead and check that stuff out. And if you know somebody who might want a little bit of discussion about how to turn that volume down, then send this episode, like, comment, do all the stuff on whatever platform you're on, and stay wild. I'll see you on the next episode. We're clear.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah, no, it was, I like how it's conversational because sometimes people will say, these are the 6 questions we're going to focus on. It was kind of nice to just let it flow. There were lots of, kind of intersecting interests and points, and yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, like I said, what I really do is I just imagine if I knew what I knew about you and I found myself sitting at a table with you at a retreat somewhere, what would we talk about? It's like that. Let's do that, because my team always does give me that you should do this and you should. I'm like, we're going to have a conversation. And so far, it seems to feel like it that way.
And it's interesting because I feel like someone on your team read my book, because when you did my intro, it wasn't the one that's in my bio.
No,
So somebody took a little bit of a deeper dive into my work.
could be.
Yeah, because that bio was actually really excellent. And I was like, somebody on there has read it.
I actually wrote it. I had done a bit of reading about you.
Yeah.
I write all those read-ins myself. I started doing them about 6 episodes ago, and I write them myself.
You haven't read the book yet.
What's that?
You haven't read the book yet.
No,
It
like
really sounded like you did.
no, no. But it's, these days, like you do a little bit of research, have a conversation with ChatGTP about what's going on, what are the core salient points, and then, it's like I had a good operating understanding of what I thought you were doing in the world. So I'm glad that it worked.
It
I'm
really
glad.
did.
Good, good,
No,
good.
I do think the book would resonate with the work that you're doing. I definitely take like that kind of like what have we always known approach, like both kind of physiologically, but also like as human communities. Like I don't specifically talk about like tribal societies, but
I think you'd get some interesting value out of that. And I mean, like with EFT, for example, we've known about that for ages. Like, I'm not kidding you. Go watch chimpanzees. It's not simply that they soothe themselves with touch, they touch the same places.
it's so
In this,
wild.
in the same way that yoga, downward dog is named that way because dogs do that shit. Like, it's like EFT has its origins, in my opinion, in primate psychology before we lost all our hair and started walking on our hind legs. So I think that if we expand our understanding of ourselves back about 6 million years, we'll gain an even bigger understanding of really who we are. One thing I didn't get to say, but I've done a lot of work in PTSD related trauma. You can imagine we were doing warfighter work. We were building trauma simulators. I mean, we built dummies. You've probably done CPR in your training in medical school with a dummy, and the dummy was like no more real than a mannequin in the store. Not ours. Ours were so real. The skin felt real. It had hair. It moved. The blood viscosity was accurate. The blood pulsed from the femoral artery at the right pressure and rate and wouldn't stop until the tourniquet was on. And you and I both know that tourniquet is not Bruce Willis puts his belt on there. You have to winch that baby shut. Like, we're talking serious. And then we had to go from there into, like, the purpose of that program was to train in the mechanics, but also in effect PTSD inoculation. The idea was if you interacted enough with this thing and then it happened to you, you would not freeze and you'd save your friend's life. And it was super effective. We won awards from Congress and from the US Army. But it also opened my doors. This is 15 years ago,
Yeah.
opened my eyes to the first time to psychedelics, MDMA, psilocybin, and PTSD. The work has been fascinating.
The other thing that is different is there's a different pathway for event-based trauma and relational trauma. I didn't really get into
Mm,
that piece of it, but you were able to prevent event-based trauma. Relational-based trauma, they don't necessarily have those same patterns of interrupt. I think we've kind of lumped all of trauma into that one thing. Whereas from complex trauma perspective, now we're kind of differentiating the two. And what we've been told is like there's this one way of doing trauma therapy, but if you don't differentiate between the event, which for you was the lighter, and the relationship, which for you was the child, the solutions to that are different. And we've just lumped trauma therapy into one thing. So
mm.
that's a lot of my next decade of work, I think, is going to be helping the folks with the more complexities of it instead of saying it's this one thing.
Yeah, I think so. There's something interesting you might want to just think a little bit about relative to early humans is that if you consider how unlikely life used to be, I mean, these days, if you have, I mean, of course, bad things happen, but if you have 5 children, all 5 of them are going to make it to their 70s by statistically these days, right? Like
Yeah,
we,
that's what Hannah Ritchie talks about.
sorry?
Hannah Ritchie, that book that I referenced
Yeah.
about the world not being ending.
Yeah, exactly. Like I recognize that we have these existential threats and climate this and that, but like you walking down the street today, we are safer than we've ever been. And just in your next 5 minutes of life, there's food. I know many people are living at a sustenance level, but it's nothing like what it was even. You think about this, 150 years ago, there was no anesthetic.
Yeah, oh,
Like,
for sure. But I think that's why like it peaked and we're kind of on the descent now.
that's the
So
question. And I wonder if that's what's going, like you say, collapse, right? They're
have you
headed,
read Meg Wheatley at all? Like she
no.
was the leadership science guru for so long. She did like quantum leadership, but she's now kind of gone into collapsology and her stuff is pretty good. She wrote a book, Who Do You Choose to Be? But she talks about like the things that kind of signify that change in the peak of civilization and all of them map to where we're at right now. It's super interesting.
I've read like Jared Diamond's book Collapse, which of course, covers some similar themes. Like it's happened many times before and it's unlikely to not happen again. But
Yeah.
where I was kind of going is more on an individual basis. If you consider how unlikely survival used to be, I mean, and it was like we're talking, what, 80% of people didn't make it to breeding age. Like it was bloody scary. So what that meant was if you were alive on Tuesday, whatever you did on Monday must have been functional. And so if you made it to Wednesday, whatever shit you did on Tuesday must have been functional. And if you're alive 3 weeks later and you're still doing that stuff, it must be hyper functional and it locks in as a behavior. Only now it's Netflix. This old part of the brain is saying, well, I did this yesterday and I'm still alive. I asked the Hadza chief once, this guy here, let me show you. I showed the picture earlier. Where is he? This guy's name is Ngong, and he's the chief of one of the Hadza families. And I've known him for 15 years. And he actually made me, and this is the sweetest thing in the world. He made me an honorary member of the tribe when we were there last year.
I read that in your bio.
Okay, Christine, it's such the cutest thing.
The same thing happened to me in Laos. I was formally adopted by a village in Laos because I worked there for 8 years. I spent 2 months
Oh,
there.
wow.
And they did the saffron bracelet ceremony, like they call it a bossie, and everyone in the village tied a bracelet on me. So when I read that in your bio, I was like, wow, I don't know a lot of other white
Me
folks.
neither. I only know one other one, and it's Johnny Clegg, the musician who got made an honorary Zulu. And I grew up like thinking how cool that would be. And then all of a sudden I'm standing in Africa and this is happening. But I asked Nona once if they had depression. And he goes, there's no word for that in either language, in his or in Swahili. They didn't really have it. So they had to say, well, long-term sadness. And he says, oh, yeah, we have long-term sadness. And I said, well, like how long? And he goes, well, geez, I mean, sometimes people can be sad for like 2 or 3 days. This is your idea of long. I mean, I'm like, that's a fascinating answer to me. And I go, well, why? What stops it? And he goes, well, after 2 or 3 days, they get hungry. And so they have to get up and move around. And then they get up and move around and they go collect berries and then they go hunting and go get water. And of course, we know this, right? We know that moving and changing your breathing patterns. I mean, we know that some of those things help with emotional regulation, right? Only
And that's
now.
polyvagal theory. What gets you from dorsal vagal to sympathetic is movement.
There
So
you
that-
go. So
that totally
but now
maps
I'm
polyvagal
sad and I just watch Netflix. Right.
Yeah.
So he was onto something that he doesn't even understand, right? Because they don't have the Netflix version. But then I said, do you guys have suicide? And no idea. What is this? What is suicide? And I said, well, in our world, sometimes people, they end their own lives. And when I said this, he laughed. And the guy sleeping, this is in a cave. I have this all on camera, by the way. There's a guy sleeping on an animal skin in the cave, but he's not sleeping apparently, because when he hears my answer, well, some people end their own lives, he busts out laughing. Like it's an unheard of idea for them. There's no reference to it at all. And of course, then he starts asking how people do it. It was a fascinating conversation. But one of the things that highlighted for me, and this is, I've been to 65 some odd countries and have worked in some pretty extreme places. I was in Yogyakarta, right 2 days after the earthquake killed 4,500 people. I was in the city doing relief work. I mean, I've seen a variety of things, and not everybody has those experiences. I can tell you, the Hadzabe people are by far and away the most contented people I've ever seen. They are by far and away the most contented people. I'm not saying they're happy. I'm not talking cheerful, but I've spent 15 years with them, and it's like, think about it. The neurotransmitters that they live with, ours as well, the instincts and emotions that they've evolved for that environment. They live in that environment. Literally every single thing they do for pleasure is functional. Everything they do for reward is literally supporting of their survival or procreation. That's it. They don't have until a missionary. What's that?
They often have art.
They have what?
Art. So like they'll do intricate face paintings or they'll do beadwork. Art is something that I don't think of as survival based, but many of these ancient civilizations, if we want to call it that.
But you wouldn't say it's dysfunctional.
No, but I wouldn't say it's innately connected to survival.
Oh, I've visited the Lascaux Caves. I would put to you that art has a bunch of those. I would think that it is. It's part of education. It's part of your calm. You're safe. When you're making art, you're safe. Nobody's making art when there's a leopard nearby. So it's part of the community. Like if you have a bunch of people, think about it. If you're in the wilderness with me, there's 30 of us in the wilderness. There's no fences and nobody is making art and everybody is looking around. You're not going to feel safe. But if you look around and every single person around you is working on making their bows and arrows or painting their mask, you're going to know you're safe. So I would argue that it might not be directly related to safety, but it's the same as the birds chirping and the sound. It tells you that you're safe. They don't have video games. They don't have, until missionaries give them sugar and alcohol, they don't have that. So everything they're doing for pleasure, let's say at least does not fight against their survival or their procreation, and probably tangentially supports it in some way. There's no conflict. And it's a fascinating thing to see. And of course, everywhere else there is. We're all being dopamine tempted to dysfunction regularly.
Well, it doesn't have to be dopamine either. Like when
No,
I
it's a
think of
shortcut.
highest rates of suicide that I saw, it was working in Nepal the first time, which was in the year 1999, I think. 99 or 2000 was the first time I went to Nepal. And it was kids from the villages. They were drinking like the insecticide, which is a horrifying way to die.
Yeah.
And then they were setting themselves on fire. So like the stuff that I saw in the Emerge there, I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was these girls that were like 15 and they were being told to marry somebody from another village that was 50, and like it wasn't Netflix. It wasn't like a dopamine thing. It was like a sense of helplessness.
But they're slightly like what I'm saying is that for Nona or any of his tribe mates, when they wake up in the morning, in any quest for serotonin, dopamine, or any feel good chemical, any rewarding experience, the actions they take to experience those things are functional. And of course, for us, we have a ton of behaviors that aren't. So, for example, the idea that I'm going to force this young girl to marry this guy that she shouldn't be marrying, that is somebody, not her, but that is somebody else seeking an incredibly dysfunctional chemical reward, and he's imposing it upon her, right? Like he's satisfying his whatever need for pleasure, his reward systems, but in a fucked up way, in a horrible way. And she's this, and then she loses hope, and the next thing you know, she's lighting herself on fire. So I don't mean those things competitively. I mean that I think a big part of our disconnect is our reward and punishment systems evolve for that environment. And the further away from that environment we get, the harder it is to navigate, because they're like a compass system for us. And now they like literally, you wake up in the morning, tell me that you haven't had this. Come on, honestly, tell me you haven't had this conversation. Jesus, those are yummy. No, 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 no. We said we'd be good. We said we'd be good about that. Yeah, but they brought them in the office today for somebody's birthday. Listen, we said, have you not? Right? And
Yeah, totally.
Nona has never had that conversation, and neither has his wife or any of his children. They see the berries, they go, oh, look, there's berries. We're going to go eat those berries. They don't have that. We have it. And zoo animals don't like it either. If you take an elephant out of the Kruger National Park, in the Kruger National Park, it has poachers, lions, hyenas, other elephants, bushfires, drought. It does not have medical. It does not have dental. And you take it and put it in the safety of a zoo, it will live 1/3 as long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what's going on with us. So if anything, I'm just saying, I hope you will expand because I'm curious. I'd love for like, if you look at the ancestral pathways and you take a look at how all that stuff evolved from the beginning, it really unlocks some interesting questions about what's going on for us today. I wrote this book last year. I've only semi-published it because I found out that a professor of anthropology at Oxford was going to publish a book under the same title. So I had to get mine out because I owned the .com and I'd been doing lectures under it for years. And so I rushed the book out to Amazon, but it's not officially published yet. But the book speaks about evolutionary mismatch. And if you're curious, what you can do is if you go to gapfinder.com, there's an evolutionary mismatch assessment there. And I'd super be curious about your assessment of it from your lens, because it's not all psychology. It's also physiology, environment, and all that kind of stuff. But I'll bet you it's bloody related. What happens is they answer 10 questions about 10 areas of their life. And what it does is it identifies for them where they have evolutionary mismatch and then prescribes for them the natural things they could do to close the gap. And then failing that, for example, if you're living in Vancouver and the natural solution is to get more sunlight, well, that's not going to work because you're in Vancouver. So then the unnatural solution might be red light therapy or vitamin D3 supplementation or what have you. But one thing we've noticed, we've had over 150,000 people do our Wild Fit program, which is changing people's relationship with food so they never have to go on a diet again. And what's shocking about it is many of them have major psychological issues that they tell us go away. And I don't understand it fully yet. We want to do some research on it, but I'm talking, people are telling us they've been living with PTSD. It's been ruining their life. They've been living with OCD. It's been ruining their life, and it's gone. People with major food disorders, like they're literally purging every single day. And then by week 6 or 7 of the program, they're not purging anymore. And we haven't even dealt with their psychology. But what we've done is change their relationship with food. What's really interesting is, in the same way you said, and there's this weird chicken and egg, you help this woman resolve the trauma. suddenly her blood sugar regulation gets a whole lot better. I'll bet you also her cravings got better. But she did not correct her blood sugar all the way down to non-diabetic. She corrected down to pre-diabetic because she's got some lifestyle stuff that probably also has to change. The question is, where should we begin with any patient? And I think the answer is where the patient's ready. But both of those things can be really powerful. I've been shocked to see that. We've had people write to us and tell us, routinely, they write to us and go, I'm going to stop taking my antidepressants. We write back to them immediately, and we have disclaimers in our program now at the beginning that says, you must not stop taking your antidepressants in week 7 of this program until you go talk to your doctor, because you know, of course, the side effects of coming off antidepressants can be terrible. But the fact is they want to. And then, of course, they go talk to their doctor and they wean themselves off. Super interesting work. I'm privileged to do what I do.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I've got WildFit and Gap Finder up on my screen. I'll have a look.
And then just for fun, I'm in night now. I'm done for the day, so I should let you out. But I'll just show you this, just a little time machine journey for you. I shot this picture with my iPhone.
Is it a wild boar?
That is a bush pig, a warthog. That's Pumbaa from The Lion King. And that's the tribe that I was hunting with when we got him.
It's a great photo.
It's like being in a time machine, honestly. When you consider the difference between them and, say, the Maasai or somebody, those guys are using agriculture. They're thousands of generations more advanced than these guys. These guys are living as close as we can represent to the original human experience. It's really fascinating. Anyway, it's been a blast. If you have any feedback, if you find that test interesting from a trauma perspective, I'd love to know. And I'll tell you where it would be really interesting is what we're trying to do is perfect the prescription at the back end. So if you can see as you're going through the test and you look at the report where we could modify the test to more easily, for example, identify somebody who's in a trauma pattern, or in the prescription part where we're saying, hey, here are some of the things you can do.
We are developing exactly what you just described. The thing that you just said is what we're doing.
Okay. How good do you think you are when you're on? I'm just curious, like, how good are you as a speaker on stage?
Like a solid 9 out of 10. I
Nice.
did toast
That's
like
awesome.
I'm good.
Good deal.
What I'm struggling with is just the awareness. So like I'll get feedback like I gave a talk at my med school reunion in June, and 3 people came up to me, so I feel like I just watched a TED talk. I'm like, thank you. Tell your friends.
My assumption was that
I'm not the go-to. So like it's always Gabor or Bessel, but those guys are in their 80s and I'm actually just as good, which is so annoying.
No. Listen. I want you to hear, like, this is so important. I discovered some stuff about nutritional anthropology and food psychology that has literally, it got me a medal from the government. I'm blown away by my life. Mark Hyman wrote the foreword for my book. Hay House called me and offered me 6-figure advances on books. I don't even have an agent. They called me. So what I'm getting at is I feel what you're prepping for is the Tina Turner overnight success deal, where all the work that you've done behind the scenes, all the work that you've done, the research, the books you've written that have given you low grade level, what happens one day is it takes off. And I suspect that that's the path that you're headed on. I asked about
I think it's what the world needs right now. So I think I've been building this skill set that just happens to be what's needed right now. So it's kind of like those times, but I also think I'm a pretty good conduit of the message. Like I'm pretty vulnerable and like I show up more than a lot of the other guys that are giving this message. And I think that that's actually nicer for people's nervous systems. Like if you hear that nervous system from an expert and there isn't a sense of compassion behind the message, it can feel incongruent. And a lot of what you were talking about in our session was congruence. So I think my voice is a little more congruent with trauma-informed healing. So I'm hoping that will catch on because I think that's the differentiator. But we'll see, that's not the voice that people are used to hearing. They're used to hearing the 80-year-old white men who are authorities and they're authoritative. Like both Gabor and Bessel are mean old men.
I've really found that fascinating because I was super inspired by Wayne Dyer and Tony Robbins and these guys when I was a kid. But I didn't go into speaking because I was terrified of it. I was phobic and I couldn't do it. And after I sold my first tech business, I decided, actually, weirdly, I got a phone call from Tony Robbins' company asking me to speak about business. So I went and I did an event with him, and it worked so well that I toured with him for about a year, and I was the only one allowed to follow him, which is a hell of a thing, following him. That's a hell of a spot on the stage to fill. But what happened, I think, was because WildFit, when I started, it was originally for entrepreneurs. I was teaching business all over the world in big seminars and stuff. My clients kept asking me about energy and metabolism. I taught them what I knew from all my research from the early 90s of metabolism and nutrition. But then Mind Valley, my publisher, picked up WildFit and they pushed it out in the world. And we went from being a male-centric how to have more energy to run a stronger business. So when I say male centric, I mean 60% men, 40% women. We're now 95% women.
Oh,
And
interesting.
and I mean all of my, like I have whatever, 200,000 followers or something. They're 95% women. And my list is like that. It was, if only the high school me knew. But one of the things that it's made me do, because I was in the diet space, is to the degree that I might have been more authoritative in my way I taught business in the old days or what have you. Once I got into the diet space and I started dealing with women and women's emotions, and a huge segment of our population is menopausal, it actually got me to soften that message a lot. And it's been working really well. They keep coming back. When you're creating your course, I don't know what resource I can help you with here, but I want you to imagine I created a diet program, video based, 3 months, and we have an 85% completion rate. It's off the charts. It's unlike anything that's been done. And so now Mind Valley actually has me as their content architect. So I design programs because I know how to drip feed the content and deliver it in a way that I'm teaching a speaking course for Mind Valley right now. We're in month 3 and we have the highest retention of any course they've ever had. And it's so I say this because every now and again we do courses on how to create courses. And if I could support you, in any way, I'd love to help you because
Yeah, even just a couple of conversations might be helpful because that is definitely a gap for me. Like I'm good on TikTok. I can do that 1 minute banger, the hook, the right kind of voice and like an actionable thing. The TikTok I've got, but like translating TikToks to a course is different. And my master's was in medical education, so I do have some sense of like how adults learn. But again, like it's academia versus like lay public. And I think my TikTok is helping me bridge that gap, but there's definitely some missing pieces. So even just a conversation, I don't know if you do consulting like that, but that might be
I,
helpful.
I don't really, but reach out to the team. They do a follow-up sequence with all the guests and stuff, and I'm a little more available to our guests than I am to, say, followers in the traditional sense. So we can do that. And then the other
Yeah.
thing I would say is
And
that
you're
if
based in the
you,
UK?
sorry?
You're based in the UK?
No, I'm currently not based anywhere. I did live in the UK for 10 years, but I'm from South Africa, immigrated to Canada, grew up mostly in Canada, and left when I was 25. And I've been living in the Caribbean for the last 20 years, but I left in June with my wife and my kids, and we're currently homeless. We're just sort of figuring out what's next. And I don't know where it's going to be, but I think we're going to move to Dubai. We're in Estonia at the moment because my wife's Estonian. So we're here for a few weeks now.
Interesting.
No, I'm in
Okay.
Estonia. It's 9 o'clock. One offer I would make is, and don't answer me now. Write to M if it resonates with you. I don't want to make any assumptions. But our WildFit program, I think you might find it fascinating anyway, just the way the approach that we take with nutrition. But I think that more than that, from a course creation perspective, it's the gold standard. It works. So if you ever want to take the program and go through it, I'll comp you to it. But I rarely ever offer that. And then people go, of course I want to do that. No, don't say that. If you really do want to do it, then write back to M and say, Eric said I could do this, and then M will take care of it for you.
Thank
That
you.
way you don't have to say yes to me out of any sense of politeness.
Yeah. I've already got the page open, so when we finish, I'll have a look into it.
That sounds
And
good.
likewise, so much of what you speak about maps to a lot of what's in my book. The Modern Trauma Toolkit talks about Ayurvedic practice, traditional Chinese medicine, and the different ways that we've had this adaptive stress response that we've kind of communally lost over time. So, like that kind of evolutionary approach is definitely baked
Mm.
into what I'm doing.
I think you'll like, there's a chapter in the evolution gap, and it's in the version that's online now, and it's not in the version that's going to go to publishing because there's some changes have been made. But there's an entire chapter on there. I think it's called A Wilder Mind. So we have A Wilder Body, which is about your body and your health and that kind of stuff. And then there's a chapter called A Wilder Mind. And it really like it sort of talks about the mismatch that exists in the
Oh,
way
cool.
we think versus civilization. And I
Yeah.
think that what you'll get from it is I'll just be straight out. What you'll get is I'm not an academic. I didn't go that path. And so clearly I don't write as well as an academic in that way. But I think that I still present it in a reasonable way. I don't know how else to put that to you. I mean, I've certainly had some
Okay.
very strong praise from academics. I don't want to downplay it, but I also want to be realistic that compared to the academic level stuff that you read on psychology, it won't be in that level. But I still think you'll find it fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because I don't do that. I know that level. Like if somebody starts quizzing me on it, I can answer the questions, but that's not what people care about.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not how I write either. Like I'm a TikToker. I do everything at a grade 6 level. Like my refugees don't speak English, so I can't translate academic concepts, and I wouldn't even try. The reason why I blew up on TikTok is because I do what you do, and it's actually harder for me because like I have to flip my academic brain back to like well, what do people know? Like, if I use the word interoception on your show, I'm going to explain that 3 times so that people really know what I'm talking about. Because Like, academic is not the language of the people. And
When I was interviewed on this guy, the career ladder guy, I made some comment like he asked me and I go, yeah, tangentially. When he did the transcriptions, he put the definition of tangentially on this. And then people in the comments are like, oh, I have a new word. Welcome to TikTok.
totally. That is TikTok. And even in med school, we're taught to like, you're supposed to speak to your patient at a grade 5 level, and none of us do. It's one of the reasons that we got cause medical trauma. I mean, we disconnect the human from the experience the way that awful doctor did to you. And we go in there trying to prove ourselves. Like, I know what I'm talking about. Someone used really big words and confuse the fuck out of you. Why would you do that when somebody's suffering from a medical condition? They need to really understand what's happening. And my goal is to not speak in an academic way.
I think there's a time when a doctor should be trying to trigger a low grade level of trauma in you. And I'll explain what I mean. When they come in and talk to my hand, that's not the time to do that. They should be going, listen, we need to talk. You're going to need an occupational therapist. There's a good chance of recovery. You know, by the way, I recovered 100% mobility, sensation, skin growth, hair. I healed off the charts of what they said was possible. And that's largely, by the way, because he scared me so badly. He scared me so badly that I called the nurse in. The nurse called the occupational therapist in. And that day, the occupational therapist gave me a set of exercises that they wanted me to do. It was basically this, because I don't know if you can really see the scarring from there now, but this whole part here was not healing. And I lost everything up from there. The fingernails, the whole, my hand, my palm stayed on the floor when I got up from the fire. Like it was bad. And so he said that I had to do this 10 times, 3 times a day, and this, which was hell. I had no skin 10 times, 3 times a day. I didn't do that. I did it from the moment I woke up until the moment I fell asleep every day. There was no taking a break. The entire time I sat, watched TV, talked to my friends, did this whole, and I recovered everything. And ironically, I wonder if I would have done that if he didn't traumatize me.
Well, and yeah, it's such a good question because did you get traumatized? Like your window of tolerance is massive, Eric. So I differentiate that between being out the window and on the windowsill. I think he put you on the windowsill when you were like, holy shit, like
I
I'm
can
out
tell
the
you that I pressed that nurse's button about 500 times. He scared the shit out of me. I was like, what the hell did he just say? And then she came in and she talked me off the cliff. And then she said, listen, it doesn't have to be that way. We're going to get the therapist in. We're going to talk to you. But the fear that he gave me meant
yeah.
I'm not doing the exercises like that. I'm doing the exercises like I'm an Olympic swimmer.
I could have told her till the cows come home, you're going to lose your vision and your kidneys. And I mean,
Okay.
unfortunately, by the time we did intervene with a trauma response, she had half of that stuff happen.
All right.
And
So I'm with you. And this is
Okay.
so important to your video training course. This is like, here's the deal. Lecturing versus storytelling. This is so, so important. I want you to imagine that you have an A1C of 7.5. Okay. So you have an A1C of 7.5. So you're passing into the pre-diabetic range, right? And you go in for the first time and talk to the doctor, and the doctor says to you, you know, you got, and now what happens today is the doctor goes, okay, listen, Christine, I'm sorry to say, we've looked at it. Your A1C's come up a little bit. You're kind of technically now into that pre-diabetic range. And there are some lifestyle things that we really think that you could adopt to take on. If at your next checkup, the numbers have kept going in that way, we're going to have to look at a metformin prescription. And that's the general conversation that they have, right? If I was the doctor, this would be the conversation. Christine, I have some news for you, and it's not ideal. I want you to hear me about this because it doesn't have to be bad, but right now it is. Your A1C has you in the pre-diabetic range seriously and trending toward full-scale diabetes. And I recognize that these days it's so common around you that you might not know what this really means, but what it means is that your body is starting to really struggle to process sugar. Your blood is sticky. You're not circulating well. Among the things that are likely to happen to you are the loss of your eyesight. You're going to start getting tingling in your fingers. That won't bother you, but when it will bother you is when we have to cut your fingers off. And you're likely to face amputation. You are massively in risk factor for cancer and heart disease more than anything. And here's the good news is it's fully reversible. Unlike those things, unlike heart disease, unlike cancer, those things are really tough to reverse. Where you are is at the reversible stage. I would do it like that. I would want to storytell them into a low grade, not trauma, but I would want them to have a emotional response. And now they just lecture at them. And by the way, many of our Wild Fit coaches are doctors that have come to us exactly to do this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do like even when I was talking about like we understand messages through imagery and metaphor, storytelling is what sends those message, not facts. So yeah, I do agree with you. But it's interesting because when I think about how often I've had that conversation, do I actually walk the walk? I'm curious. I'm not sure.
I got a big lesson from it from this guy on this book. This book here we wrote with Hay House. It was our first one, and it was we call it post-diabetic because the rationale is that if you reverse type 2 and you move into pre-diabetic, then your doctor would still put you in the prescribable range, and his pharmaceutical rep would love to do that. But if
Yeah.
you're trending in the other direction, we regard that to be post-diabetic, not pre. So even though your A1C and other measurements might be on a metric lock with pre-diabetic, if you're trending the other way, you're not pre, you're post, you're going the other way. And then if you return to sub 5 or whatever it is that, when you get down to proper non-diabetic, you are not recovered. You are a post-diabetic, which is to say that you have a propensity for developing diabetes really easily because you've already been there once. So you need the rubber band has been stretched. So that's the premise of the book. Now, the reason that I never wrote this book is because I'm not a doctor and I refused to do it. I had people ask, you should do a book because we had literally thousands of type 2 diabetes reversals. But I'm like, I'm not writing a book. Then one day I come to work and there's a guy on my calendar and his name is Ruben Ruiz and I open up the Zoom and there he is. And this is the story he tells me, very brief version. He says, I was in 2 car accidents in a week, falling asleep behind the wheel of my car after stopping at Starbucks to get a coffee to wake myself up as I'm driving to one of my 3 clinics. I'm a medical doctor, 15-year internist, and I used to be an associate professor of medicine at UCLA. I was 40 pounds overweight, type 2 diabetic, hypertensive, and on 10 prescription medications. And then I had these 2 accidents. He says, after the second accident, I went home and I basically decided I had no right being a doctor. I'm not
Mm.
walking the talk. I have no right. I'm hypertensive. I went online and I started looking at all this stuff. And he says, I found one of your master classes. I did the master class. I then did your 3-month program. He says, I've lost 40 pounds. I am no longer pre-diabetic at all. I'm like below A1C beyond, like below pre-diabetic. I'm no longer hypertensive and I'm off 9 of my prescription meds. And then it took him another 3 months to get off the 10th one. And he then insisted that we do a book. And he was the one who told me what I just told you, that the way we tell people about diabetes, like the way we tell people about cancer is like, fuck, you have cancer. We drop it on them like a cement truck. But with diabetes, you're like, oh, well, you've got diabetes. Here's your metformin.
Which is ridiculous because like I have a lot of folks, we're seeing younger and younger cancers. I've got lots of theories about why that is, but I think a lot of it is because we're stuck in sympathetic tone and our parasympathetic nervous system is immunity, which is supposed to find cancer and turn it off. So the sympathetic overdrive, I think, is a really strong connection to why it's happening. But I'm seeing tons of young women with cancer, and even the ones with breast cancer, like, oh my God, it's breast cancer, I'm gonna die. I'm like, do you know the survival rate for the cancer you have? Like, it's super high. Like you're gonna die from heart disease, like along with the rest of
Yeah.
us. Like,
But if only they
that's
reacted, the
the
joke is they're overreacting often to cancer and then they're heavily underreacting to diabetes.
chronic lifestyle stuff. I just finished my lifestyle medicine boards last year. I'm actually going to be speaking at the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine conference in a month in Texas, but I'm not going. I'm going to be living in Mexico City for a couple of months. But that is like the people that I'm like, this is where the message of like prevention of stress response and primary prevention needs to come in, and it's through lifestyle medicine. It's slowly creeping in, but it's yeah. This is like I'm kind of obsessed with learning academically, and part of it is because it's really hard to infiltrate the 80-year-old men. And so the more credentials that I have, the more that people be like, oh wow, she really knows what she's talking about. But also, like, I want to know it for me and I want to know it for like the planet. Like, this is the kind of stuff that we have to be shifting our focus towards. And I do think that the lifestyle medicine as a subspecialty of medicine is really just super different. And then I'm working with like longevity science. My internist is actually just self-developed a fellowship with Peter Attia.
Hmm.
And the stuff that she's putting me through, I'm like, this is wild. Like, doctors don't do any of this shit. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
currently wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I've never done that before. I've never ordered that for somebody. I mean, none of my patients can afford it, but it's really, really interesting just
Okay,
how
there's one thing I want to say to you about that.
things
Just given that I've worked so much in diabetes and stuff, I love CGMs. I've worn them occasionally just to measure some sort of stuff. But the one thing to consider, and this is not understood, and it's one of the reasons I like CGMs, but I don't like the way they're being applied. And this is what I mean. The CGM will teach you to be terrified of blood sugar spikes. It's like, oh, I spiked today. That's a bad thing. That's absolutely not the case. And I want you to think about it, just put a logical lens on this for a minute. If you and me are in Africa where we spent 99% of our genetic heritage, right? That's like, and we're in sub-Saharan Africa and we walk along and I spot a tree that has a little wax chimney about this big on it. I'm going to break that tree open, and what I'm going to find inside that tree is a beehive. And you and I are going to eat all of the honey. We're not going to have a little bit. We're not going to go on a diet. We're going to eat all of it, and then our blood sugar is going to spike really dramatically. And that's absolutely what it's supposed to do. And then 3 weeks later, we're walking along and we stumble upon a tree full of red berries. We are going to eat them, and we're going to spike our blood sugar to no end. It's going to spike like crazy, and it's supposed to do that. We are not supposed to live without blood sugar spikes. What the CGMs are teaching people to do is to like moderately control their blood sugar at a manageable level. That's not the solution. The solution is that it is okay that your blood sugar spikes on a seasonal basis for occasional windfalls, the way it did for your ancestors, and then that you have no blood sugar for weeks at a time. And I don't mean none, but I mean that you eat no carbohydrates for some weeks at a time. You're meant to have that. Mother Nature came along and said, sorry, Christine, but there's no root vegetables this week. Like the berries are gone. You're in keto whether you like it or not. And then the body corrects. So the CGM, the one problem with it is that everybody starts getting afraid of a particular blood sugar spike. That's not, the real focus is the seasonal fluctuation of blood sugar more than it is avoiding the spikes, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. And I have such an ethical conflict around like ketosis and protein because I'm an ethical vegetarian. And it's not
Christine,
like, I know
don't tell me that.
evolutionarily we were supposed to be eating animals and we always have, but I can't buy into the agricultural industrial complex. Like the
Okay.
way that animal beings are treated, and we actually eat their cortisol. So
Okay.
we could have like another hour discussion about that.
I know. But I feel very compelled. I also was like that for many, many years. And I want to share something really super important with you. There are three pillars of sort of ethical veganism: animal rights, environmental rights, and what was the third one? Oh, and human health. The three main pillars that it's like, okay, I think you and I agree the human health one is flawed. We've eaten meat for a long time, and as long as the meat is good, meat itself isn't bad for humans. Are we on board with that?
Not anymore, because I just finished the lifestyle medicine boards and they have a really compelling argument
What
around
is it?
plant-based diets being better for health. So maybe.
All right. I'm going to point out that there's this like meat cancer link, right? That they talk about quite a lot. PETA talks about it and so on. Like it's like
Processed meats. Yeah.
so you know that where you live now, there used to be 11 or 12 species of mammoths, mastodons, elephants, and so forth that lived everywhere that you are. There were two other species of bison. They're all gone because the North American Indians ate them. And they ate them because humans have been red meat eaters from the very beginning of time. We could never have left Africa if we were herbivorous. You can't leave a continent unless you're agricultural. You can't leave a continent if you're dependent on the plants of that continent because those plants don't exist anywhere else. The only way you can leave Africa is if you're a meat eater. It's the only way. Over billions of years you could leave, but not as quickly as humans did. I think that the health, like we've suddenly seen this upsurge of cancer and all these heart disease, and then they blame it all on meat. And we're like, yeah, except the meat eating's been going on for millions of years. And new things like trauma and glyphosate have come in. So I would put to you that the only true superfood on the planet, really, truly, are ethically raised, properly raised meat, fish, and eggs. Every plant you've ever eaten fights your digestive system. It doesn't mean it's bad for you, but it does. It fights your digestive system. Meat doesn't do that at all. It's like literally, if you want to get somebody out of their inflammation, if you want to get them out of their autoimmune condition and stuff, take them off all plants, have them a few weeks where they eat only meat, fish, and eggs. It's done. They go away. So I know I can't prove that to you in this moment, but
Yeah.
pillar
Do
number one.
you have a trial that shows that? Because everything I've studied shows the opposite.
Well, yes, there are trials, and I can definitely send you some information on it. What I would say is that any trials that you like, the guy who popularized the plant-based lifestyle, his name was Ansel Keys. He was the guy who started it. He launched his favorite 7-country study, and that gave way to the whole thing. And he was heavily funded by safflower, olive oil companies, and all the other fat companies. And he was the guy who kind of launched the huge anti-meat campaign. Of course, what they found out afterward, and this is absolutely fit, like this is not conspiracy theory, it's fact, is that when he went to Crete, for example, one of the blue zones, and he wanted to find out what they were eating because they have so many centenarians, he asked them what they're eating. He took samples of the food, sent it to the lab, broke it into its constituents, and you know what he found out? They ate no saturated fat and they ate no meat. And then he published that in his 7-country studies, and that became the foundation of every research project on meat. It destroyed research. What he didn't disclose is that he took the samples during Lent, the only 2 weeks of the year that the Cretians don't eat meat and fish.
The randomized trials that are happening now are much better. And we have more case control studies than we do RCTs, but they're good studies. Like I literally, because I did the lifestyle medicine boards, I had to read through probably 100 studies. And a lot of them do show that plant-based
Okay,
lifestyle
read
is less
read the
inflammatory.
read the Big Fat Surprise. The book is written by an investigative reporter. Her name is Nina Techholz or something like that. And what happened is
I
she
think she
wrote,
was one of the speakers on that sugar conference.
she should be. She should be. I
Yeah.
don't know. I haven't met her, but she and I exchange social media every now and again. But she wrote an article about the diet industry, and the diet industry is, I mean, it is the most disastrous industry. I mean, it's right up there with pharma, and not that there aren't good aspects of pharma, but Pfizer paid $3.2 billion in criminal judgments in a single year. So there's definitely some flaws with pharma. But she wrote this thing on the diet industry, and then a publisher came to her and said, "Would you please do an investigative report in the low fat movement?"
I actually watched her talk. Like, so in the sugar summit or whatever it's called, Kick Sugar Summit, I did watch her talk.
Two fascinating things that come out of her book. One of the things is the way food research is conducted now. If you wanted to study cannabis, there was millions of dollars available, millions of tax dollars available to study cannabis, but your stated purpose had to be to prove harm. And then you could get the funding. But if you were there trying to prove anything theoretical about cannabinoids and the relationship to cancer, no funding for you. That is what has happened to food research now. The biggest,
arguably big agriculture, like meat industries and dairy industries, have way more money than vegetable ones.
Who is the biggest importer of American beef? Who buys more American beef than anybody? China. Who is the number one exporter of soybeans in the world? China. China owns TikTok. China has been indoctrinating an entire generation of children to hate meat, to drive the cost of beef down for their own import, and to boost the cost of soy so they can sell more soy and make Beyond Meat and so on. Look at all the money those are, and Beyond Meat raised all this money, and they're basically gone out of business because it's a model like the lobbyists have gone the other way, and the low fat ones, it was the sugar industry. It wasn't the meat industry. It was the sugar industry, and this is a totally acknowledged truth. There's no conspiracy theory behind it. I'll always delineate when I'm crossing the line, but in this case, two Harvard researchers were hired by the sugar industry to frame fat and blame fat for the uptick in heart disease, because the sugar industry had figured out that it was actually sugar causing heart disease. And so they went and hired these two Harvard researchers, and they wrote this very famous paper. It was published in, I think, JAMA, because back then you didn't have to disclose your funders. And it became lore that fat was killing everybody. They created the low fat industry in combination with Ansel Keys and got us all terrified of fat and meat. And they devastated millions and millions of lives. So I'll leave that pillar alone for a minute because it's a harder one to nail down. But if you, from an evolutionary biology perspective, it holds fire. There's never, ever, ever on the history of Earth been a successful multi-generational population of non-meat eaters. It's never happened. But there have been several multi-generational non-plant eater humans. For example, the people who crossed into North America crossed Beringa, and it took them thousands of years, and there were no plants up there. So they spent thousands of years eating only meat.
And so this
is Canada.
Sorry?
That's people crossing into Canada.
But the food is different now. And they changed the way that, like, they removed the nutritional content from wheat, for example. So like the kinds of things we're seeing in gluten and dairy, like the chemicals added, the nutritional content removed, the way they're just fucking with it. Chickens can no longer fly. They can't even stand up on their own legs because they've got so much.
Totally right, 100%. But that's not restricted to meat.
Current agricultural practices have changed what's healthy for us. So I'm going to argue what's happened in the last 60 years.
All right. So
if I lived in Kyrgyzstan, I would totally be behind what you're saying. But I live in Western Canada.
So you eat tomatoes?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. How are they grown?
You
grow your own, which is certainly better.
I grow all my own tomatoes.
Okay, but most Canadians are eating tomatoes from where? BC hothouses, Ontario hothouses. They're eating GMO tomatoes grown on fake nutrition in an environment that destroyed acres of natural wildlife and killed tens of thousands of animals. To grow avocados, you have to destroy 40 acres of virgin rainforest, kill 10,000 animals, and then you have to kill 6,000 animals a year to keep them out of the avocado grove. There's nothing ethical or vegan about avocado farming. That's like fairly healthy avocado farming.
A really good book to read because, like, if we're talking about sustainability Hannah Ritchie's book, the one, It's Not the End of the World, I've referenced it a couple times. I just read it recently. I was doing like a book tour in Europe, and it was kind of really eye-opening. She's like the stats person. So when she talks about like if we kill off more and more humans because we've all decided to ignore pandemics and vaccines, then yes, what you're talking about is a sustainable plan. But right now, human agricultural practices is not sustainable for this planet of people. So it's worth a read.
I think it's a popular idea and it is fascinating. I don't know how I don't know how easy it is to wrap our minds around. I don't know how easy it is to wrap our minds around the reality of that. There's one example is like the Kruger National Park. They kill thousands of elephants every year because they're overpopulating the park. And because we are bunny huggers, we refuse to give them meat to anybody. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of people living around those parks that could be eating that meat. And if we grew elephants, and there's tons of land all over Africa that could be growing elephants, bison, buffalo. Here's a, just in terms of the environmental thing, I agree with you. There are devastating farming practices relative to meat, but the issue is not the meat. The issue is the agricultural practice. Hothouse farming of vegetables is far more devastating than at least the cows are somewhat in nature, even if they've destroyed the forest to get there. The hothouses have destroyed everything. There's literally nothing left. They've taken out even the grass, and the soil beneath it is baking under concrete. It's gone. It's dead forever. Avocados are 25% of the deforestation of Mexico. The issue is not the crop. The issue is the method of farming. There's only one type of farming that is environmentally positive, and it's called regenerative farming, and it requires animals. There's no other way to do it. You have to stimulate as closely as possible a natural environment, and that requires animals to be there. We're in a heavily propagandized world against meat at the moment. And what I'd say is we can argue about whether the planet can sustain this or not, but what I would suggest instead is what's for you to be of maximum influence in your world, for you to have the maximum good in your world, you need to be as nutritionally and healthily, functional as you can be. So starving yourself of essential nutrients is not going to help you to save this planet. I would argue that buying into the plant-based myth is going to rob you of that opportunity. But if you have these three pillars, I think there's ample evidence that meat is one of the healthiest, best possible things that we could be eating, as long as it's well raised, as well as it's ethically raised and so on. Meat is not bad for the environment in any way unless you're badly farming it. But if we're going to do that, we have to throw out the tomatoes and everything else because it's the farming methodology. And then the last one is the one that is indefensible and it's difficult. And that is that an animal has to die in order for us to eat it. But 10,000 animals have to die just to grow your avocados, and 6,000 a year. To grow the equivalent vegetables, they kill thousands of animals, the equivalent of that one cow. It's the math is way off. So I'm just saying that if you ever find yourself craving it, you should at least be willing to experiment and read the big fat.
Oh, I do. Like I'm 80% vegetarian. I don't, because I'm celiac, so I can't actually be vegetarian because I can't be both because of the countries I travel to.
Right.
Like, I lived in Korea for a month this year. There is no vegetarianism in Korea. It's an impossibility. So like I'm 80% vegetarian. It's not like I don't eat meat, but it's because I can't source healthy meat in a way that I don't think I'm filling my body full of cortisol and inflammatory markers.
But you know that in Calgary you can.
That is good research based on modern agricultural practices.
Totally with you, but
if I were able to get everything from the Hutterites, I might feel different.
No, but you're in Calgary. You're in one of the best places in the world to get good meat.
Yeah, but I travel for 4 months of the year.
Yeah. But I mean, when you're at home, you can get really outstanding, really well-raised, solid grass-fed beef. You can get bison. It's like the best meat in the world.
That's what I eat. When I do eat meat, I eat bison, elk, venison. Yeah.
Good deal. Well, I'm glad we had this.
I'll even eat an alpaca. It's a pleasure to chat with you, Eric.
Yeah, me too.
I'm gonna go down all kinds of rabbit holes, which is what I always love. Like I'm the quintessential lifelong learner, so it's nice to.
All right, I have to do one more. The one more thing I want to say, and this only comes out of like legitimate. I believe the work you're doing is super important, so I just want to offer this: is that these days we're living in this world of, like you talked about, equity and privilege and all this kind of stuff. Gabor and these guys, the minute you refer to them as being angry white men, you're diminishing yourself, in my opinion. You're playing a racist card. And I think and I know you don't mean to, but it's a racist, sexist card. You're saying they're white men in their age. Yeah. What I would say to you is that in today's world, this whole equity thing and DEI, I'm still unresolved about how we're supposed to deal with all the imbalances that we have in the world. But I don't think we help the imbalances by using them. And so what I would say is those are the giants upon whose shoulders we get to stand as we move into
I
the
say
next
that too.
generation. That's all I wanted to say. There's a little edge there. And as a friend, I wanted to say I saw it and I just wanted to mention
No,
it.
you're right. And that's my point of vulnerability is I'm like, how is it that these giants that have such an understanding of what trauma is, but neither of them have actually studied the therapies. So when I studied with Bessel, he was trying to teach tapping. He'd never learned it himself. So he was just tapping random points in his body. I'm like, that's not actually what tapping is. You're just randomly tapping things. Likewise with Gabor, he said to me a couple of times, I don't know why you keep studying different kinds of trauma therapy. Like, you're a doctor, people will just believe you. And I'm like, oh, holy crow, like you can actually make trauma worse if you don't know how to do it properly.
No
But he
kidding.
doesn't really understand that because he's never studied how to do trauma therapy. What really does bother me is like they have introduced the concept of what trauma is and how you're facing it to the general public, but they don't have an embodied understanding of what to do. And so they can do more harm by showing up in a gruff persona or in a lack of co-regulation in their own nervous systems. Like Gabor will put a person on stage with him and do trauma therapy. And what he'll do is he'll poke them until he finds their lighter flick. He will find the lighter flick, but he's not in a calm body and they're not in a calm body. And they will leave the stage with those associations having amplified. And that upsets me. So even though everyone's like, wow, this is so powerful to find the moment of trauma, I'm like, yes, but this first generation of trauma people don't hold the key to what to do next. But because of how they're getting the awareness out, it's actually getting worse, not better.
That's totally cool. So one of the things we teach in our speaking programs and in course creation programs is something we call audience velocity. So it's like, what are you willing to share with an audience at what level? So for example, I, speaking at a corporate event, will not bring up any of my views about, say, psychedelics. I just won't do that. But when they come to my retreat, I will then talk to them about my experiences and my views about those types of things, right? So what I would say is for you to be like, you're doing a podcast, you're having a conversation. At the moment that you refer to them by race or by gender with any bitterness, you actually diminish yourself and not them. And what I would rather you see is you go, the work that these guys do, awakening people to the realities of trauma has been phenomenal. That people are talking about it. Like I see Gabri's on all these podcasts, so people are aware. And that's why I'm really glad to be here to fill the blanks because I have studied the treatments for that kind of stuff. And then now you get somebody to the second level or second generation, like you now have them at a retreat or you have them at a program, right? They're in your program. Now you can discuss what the challenges are. You can say, look, I have huge respect for these guys. And they're not, you do it like that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and you're right. You're absolutely right. And I think it's like we had cameras off at that point. And it was kind of a regrettable way to frame it. Because what you were asking is, do you do lots of speaking? And what popped in was like, this is what's in my way, is the message that people are resonating with is this is what trauma is, almost like how the media says it. It's like, you're in danger, you're in danger. Whereas my message is a sense of safety. And so I'm not activating people's amygdalas in the same way that the dangerous message is, which is what they're giving. And it's almost the same thing as what mass media does. And so, like, it's not that I necessarily resent that, like, these 80-year-old men are still getting these huge platforms to send the message. It's that to me, the message is making it worse. And so I didn't articulate that very well because I said it in a flippant way. But what's underneath it is that, and I can't say that publicly, like that's not okay to say, but I do know that. So you're totally right. That messaging that you just said is way more effective to help people get where it's really good.
And I'm sorry if I overcoached that. I
No, that
felt
was
like I had
great.
enough
That was
connection
really
to share
helpful,
it.
Eric. And I do think that a lot of our messaging, we're trying to guide people towards like their innate understanding of the way that things work. And it is a softer message. And it's not like you're, you're going to die because this is super bad. Although it's interesting because you did say that the physicians might be more effective if they did that. This is the difference between getting out of the window and being on the windowsills. And I can keep people on the windowsills where they're just aware enough, but they haven't flown out the window because they're like, I can't handle this. I have to watch Netflix. Yeah, it's interesting. Like how to stay on the windowsill. It's a really good question. And as I'm doing the course creation, it's a really important question for me to keep thinking about.
Sounds good. I think so.
This was fascinating. I'm super
Genuine
excited to
pleasure.
make this connection.
Yeah, me too. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. Like I said, go look at the Wildfit thing. If it resonates with you, write to M. We'll have a conversation. And when you get to course creation stuff, certainly feel free to write to the team. And if they can find time with me to have a quick chat with you, I will. And we occasionally do a course creation program. I don't think we've got one scheduled for a while, but one way or the other, let's see what we can do to help you.
Awesome. Well, sounds like next is bedtime.
Yeah.
I wish you good rest. Thank you for your time and
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great night.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Wilder Life. Please leave a review and share it. A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.